Welcome to today's lecture of Freedoms of Air and Open Skies Policy. So, first, let's understand what is the meaning of freedoms of air. So, freedoms of air are a set of commercial aviation rights that grant a country's airlines the privilege to enter into a land or another country's airspace. They were formulated as a result of disagreements over the extent of aviation liberalization and in the Convention of International Civil Aviation, that is ICAO, in the year 1944, which is also known as Chicago Convention. The United States had called for this standardized set of separate air rights that was to be negotiated between states, but most of the countries were concerned that the size of the US airlines would dominate the air travel and there would be less of strict rules. So the freedoms of air are basically the fundamental building blocks of international commercial aviation route network. And the use of term freedom and right confers entitlement to operate international air services only within the scope of multilateral and bilateral treaties, that is, services agreements, and that allow them. So now let's talk about the first, freedom of air. This is the most basic right which allows an airline from country A to fly through countries B airspace without landing. Like, for example, one example is already here, but another example I'll give you. An American airline flight from the US to somewhere in South America would be permitted to fly through Mexico's airspace to get there. Next, the second, freedom of air. So this is also another basic right that allows airlines from country A to land into country B for the purpose of refueling, maintenance, etc. And as long as it doesn't involve deplaning or involving or um, uh, embarking more passengers. So another example is right here, but I will give you some more example, like a South African Airways flight from the US to South Africa could stop in the Cape Verde Islands to refuel, but no passengers could get off the airplane. Next, let's talk about the third, freedom of air. So this allows airlines from country A to bring passengers originating in country A to country B. Like, for example, a United Airlines flight from the US to Australia could bring passengers originating in the US down to Australia. Next, we would be talking about the fourth, freedom of air. This allows airlines from country A to bring passengers originating in country B to country A. For example, using the same United Airlines flight, they could bring passengers originating in Australia up to the US. Next, let's talk about the fifth, freedom of air. So this allows airlines from country A to bring passengers between country B and country C as long as the flight originates in country A. So example is Air New Zealand, based in New Zealand, is allowed to fly passengers between Los Angeles, which is in US, and London, which is UK, because the flight originates in Auckland, which is again New Zealand. So the rest of the freedoms are unofficial, as I mentioned before, but they are generally understood throughout the industry. Next, the sixth, freedom of air. So this allows the airline from country A to carry passengers between country B and C via country A. For example, British Airways would be allowed to carry passengers between India and the US via its UK home. Next, the seventh, freedom of air. This is very, very similar to the fifth freedom, but it allows an airline from country A to carry passengers between country B and C without having it to be an extension of a flight from country A. For example, if Air New Zealand started its flights between Vancouver and Rio de Janeiro with no ongoing service to New Zealand, that would use seventh freedom rights. Next, the eighth, freedom of air. This is also called consecutive cabotage, and it allows an airline from country A to carry passengers between 2 points in country B as long as the flight originates in country A or a third country, which is C. Like, for example, Air Canada could fly between Chicago and Los Angeles, both in the US, if the flight started in Toronto or any other place outside the United States. Another example, as we can see, the right to fly between two or more airports in a foreign country while continuing its service to one's own country. Next, ninth freedom of air, and the last freedom of air is this is one which is usually referred to as cabotage, and it allows an airline from country A to carry passengers within country B without restriction, without any kind of restriction. So, as we can see, an example very clearly mentioned in a pic here. So, I'll give you an example like the EU has been pushing the US to allow cabotage. Now, this would allow EU airlines like Lufthansa, for example, like the fly regular domestic routes in the US. And as you can imagine, this won't be happening very soon. So that is all. Now let's have a quick recap of the nine freedoms of air. So as we discussed, they are the set of commercial aviation rights formulated in 1944 ICAO, and there are nine freedoms of air. The first freedom, as we discussed, the right to fly over a foreign country without landing. The second freedom, right to refuel or carry out maintenance in a foreign country, but the passengers will not be allowed to embark or disembark. The third freedom, the right to fly from one's own country to another. The fourth freedom, the right to fly from another country to one's own country. The fifth freedom, the right to fly between two foreign countries on a flight originating or ending in one's own country. The sixth freedom, the right to fly from a foreign country to another while stopping in one's own country for non technical reasons. The seventh freedom, the right to fly between two foreign countries while not offering flights to one's own country. Or the eighth freedom, the right to fly inside a foreign country, continuing to one's own country. And the last freedom now, the ninth freedom, right to fly inside a foreign country without continuing to one's own country. So that's all for the nine freedoms of air and the clear skies policy. So that is the end of the slide. Thank you very much.